electromagnetic field is a form of energy. It comes in two kinds. There's the kind that moves through space, like a cell phone field, and there's a kind that's sort of bonded to its source, like near a high voltage power line. Well, the Earth makes an electromagnetic field, and there are electromagnetic fields from cosmic sources, but they are a fraction of the strength of man-made fields. That's what we're mostly concerned about. Virtually anything that plugs into a wall or anything that runs on a battery, anything electrical in nature works by and is surrounded by an electromagnetic field. It's a very pervasive aspect of the modern world. So pervasive that we sometimes don't see it. Our exposure to man-made electromagnetic fields increased enormously, millions of times over the last 50 years. And the growth is continuing, it's accelerating. Because the general societal environment is like the Wild West. There are no rules. As long as somebody doesn't get acutely shocked, virtually anything goes. The proliferation of devices fed into and is the source of electromagnetic fields in the environment. But you need to draw a clear distinction between the proliferation of devices and the absence of information concerning the consequences of the devices. If you knew that the device was hurting you, you might use it differently. It's that information that's missing. It's not the devices, it's the information concerning the consequences that is badly lacking. The most common sources of electromagnetic fields in the general environment, the sources that people experience most frequently are things like cell telephone, Wi-Fi, the vicinity of high voltage power lines, and one particular device used in the home, the electric blanket. Those are the primary sources. Again, all electrical devices are the sources of fields. Those are probably among the top four. And of course, in industry, it's a whole different story. Very specialized devices. It's a much more complex issue. Well, the function of electricity within the human body is to make life, to make consciousness. Those things are impossible without electrical forces. The body detects electromagnetic frequencies, and it detects them in different ways depending on the frequencies. The low frequencies are detected in one way, high frequencies in another way. The commonality is a specialized cell that can react to their presence and set up an internal signal when the subject's exposed. People detect electromagnetic fields because they have specialized cells that respond to the presence of the field, like the eye responds to light or the ear responds to sound. There are special cells that actually do the detecting. The same story applies to man-made electromagnetic fields that aren't put there for the purposes of actually communicating with the body, but they do. The body displays just an infinitely broad series of reactions. It depends on many factors, including one's genetic predisposition. There's essentially nothing off the table. There are no things that don't happen. There are no things for which there's no evidence that they could happen. It's like asking what effect can be produced by sunlight. Sunlight can affect somebody and would result in a wide variety of behaviors. It's the same notion. We don't know about the relative risk of electromagnetic fields at different frequencies. Based on what we know now, they are equally dangerous or equally risky. There's no reason to favor one over the other. There have been no rules or laws of any consequence that have been changed to reflect the risks associated with fields. In fact, it's been the opposite. There's a stark absence of any official consideration. That's really the root cause of this societal problem we have. Nothing's been done. It's not difficult to prove the impact of electromagnetic fields on the human body, and it's precisely what I've been doing for almost 40 years. You just have to raise money to fund the research, and then you've got to design the research properly. You do number one and number two, and you get the data. There's no resistance to saying that there's an impact at the level of individual scientists. The great taboo here is the absence of money to fund research by independent scientists. That's where the great resistance is. If research funding became available for doing these studies, you'd have thousands of scientists in every country on earth lining up to actually do the studies. And we know how to do the studies. We just don't have the money to do it. In terms of symptoms, the human body reacts to the presence of electromagnetic fields in one of two ways. They can react the way Anne and Bernadette appear to react. That is to say, acute symptoms develop and then abate, and you go through these continuous cycles. The other kind of reaction is a chronic reaction whereby the changes in the body occur continuously over a long period of time, and you wake up one day and find out you have cancer. Two different patterns of reaction, both associated with chronic exposure to electromagnetic fields. Electromagnetic hypersensitivity is a neurological syndrome. It's a collection of symptoms exhibited by somebody who has an unusual, that is to say, non-typical sensitivity to man-made electromagnetic fields. The fact of the matter is, if the hypersensitivity of these women in France is recognized, if health risks due to cell phones are recognized, it's going to have a profound and disruptive effect on the industries that make these devices. They are predicated and built on the idea that they can put this stuff into the environment with no consequences. Once you begin suggesting that there's a consequence, then the specter of lawyers, plaintiffs' lawyers, bringing suits becomes enormous, and they are scared to death. I don't think they have a reason to be scared to death. I've got a foot in both worlds, and I understand them both, and I don't see any reason, but it's not my money. They're worried about their money. I'm not worried about their money. Conversely, they're not worried about not causing cancer in somebody or causing problems with Anne and Burnett. They're worried about making money. They don't want to see Anne and Burnett suffer, but they're primarily worried about making money. They care a lot less about them suffering than they do. It's exactly what you might expect. Now, there's no money to be made by devising ways of taking it out of the environment. There's a lot of money to be lost by having to recognize that the public is concerned about it. It's all very simple. Man is an electromagnetic animal. He works by virtue of electromagnetic forces. It would be unbelievable if external electromagnetic fields didn't have an effect. It was this founding principle which set off my whole career. It was a principle that I learned from my mentor when I was in graduate school, and it's been the guiding principle of all of my research. It would be not conceivable that the fields wouldn't have an effect. What they are, in whom they occur, how they occur, are all appropriate scientific problems to be studied if funded. Well, let's be clear what I believe. I believe that the animal evidence and the human evidence indicates that electromagnetic fields produce a wide variety of symptoms and diseases in human beings. There's many areas of further research needed, but the position that there is no evidence that it's safe is just incredibly wrong. That's my judgment regarding the evidence. The only way to lessen exposure to electromagnetic fields is to move away from the area where the fields are present, or wrap yourself in some substance that has a shielding effect. Both those things are possible. Perhaps not convenient, but possible. It's getting progressively harder to get away from areas where there are no electromagnetic fields. You can go, at least in this country, into the deepest forest, and the man-made electromagnetic fields are there, and the levels of those fields are 1,000,000 times greater than before the turn of the 20th century, for example. So it's absolutely pervasive. There's no way to get around it. Putting a steel cage around you is just not a practical solution to being exposed. A more practical solution is eliminating other factors in the environment that are stressors, factors that tax the body's adaptive capacity. If you follow that strategy, then you're not trying to block the field, you're trying to block the consequences of the body detecting the field, which is quite a different thing. So if you sleep properly, if you eat properly, if you exercise properly, if you don't smoke, if you don't go to extremes in terms of the amount of exposure that you get, those are all positive factors that count on the good side, as opposed to long-term exposure to high fields, which counts on the bad side when you start adding everything up to do the calculus and decide whether you're going to get sick or not. The skepticism within the community of physicians, to the extent it exists, I mean, I've never taken a poll, and I can't really say much about it, except that to the extent that it exists, it comes from a perspective within which each physician is educated. There are no physicians who are educated to treat electromagnetic hypersensitivity. So people who suffer from it fall through the cracks. Or if they're seen at all, they don't get a proper workup. They don't get a proper neurological workup. They don't get a sleep study. They don't get the things that would be needed to understand at a clinical level what the problem is. They're usually sent to a psychiatrist, which only fuels their frustration, because they know they're not crazy. There is no medical specialty devoted to this, and there never will be unless there's some serious interest, some serious funding, and some serious research. It's a chicken and an egg issue. The evidence we have now is pretty strong that there's a correlation between exposure to electromagnetic fields and negative health impacts, both chronic impacts, by which I mean things like cancer, and impacts that develop acutely and then wax and wane. For example, the symptoms of Anne and Bernadette. If we have more research, we're going to have better information. But we have to have more research funded by the right organizations. If the wrong organizations fund it, the result is much worse than if they did nothing, because they muddy the waters. They produce results that don't help scientists, but that are incredibly confusing to laymen. As technology continues to expand and we continue this essentially cancerous growth of exposure to fields in the environment, it's been incredibly explosive. The consequences are pretty clear. They're going to be contributing factors to disease, but that doesn't help us too much in understanding any individual case. We're still going to be troubled with problems of causality and causality in a particular patient. We have to work out general principles. For example, principles like cigarette smoking causes cancer. Therefore, if you want to smoke, you smoke, but you recognize what the consequences are. That's essentially where this is all going to wind up, because our cell telephones are not going away.